And we'll open item 17, Commission Policy 1, General Guidelines for the Commission, second reading, Commissioner and APRP Committee Chairman Dave McNinch for possible action. The Commission will have a second reading of Commission Policy 1, General Guidelines for the Commission, and may take action as recommended by the Committee. Recommendations include editorial changes from the May Committee and Commission meetings, changes to reflect current practices and standards, including a section on Commission record keeping, and spacing the number of Commission policies first and second reading from one meeting to the next before a change to a policy is adopted. This is the final reading for adoption or to adopt revisions to Commission Policy 1. Commissioner McNinch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's not a lot to go over. I don't think we had any changes from the first hearing. There wasn't a lot of conversation about it. This is Policy 1, one of the three rules of practice that we do need to get to the Secretary of State's office sooner than later. The other two are Policy 3 and Policy 4, which we decided to take a little different path by making some amendments to the NAC. So by getting Policy 1 out of the way, it'll be the first policy out of many to come. The committee's reviewing and processing. So basically, the policy goes over the general guidelines of the Commission. So it outlines selection of a chair and vice chair, meetings, how we conduct our meetings, set our agendas, compensation, kind of delineates official duties, things of that nature. I don't know if anybody has any questions. I'll be glad to take a shot at answering them. But other than that, there's not a lot to go over with it.
Questions for Commissioner McNinch or comments? Okay, County Advisory Board's input on item 17, Commission Policy 1, second reading. Seeing none, I'll open it up. Public comment in Las Vegas. Item 17, Commission Policy 1.
No comment, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, and how about Reno?
No comment, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Any public comment in Elko? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board. Is there any further discussion or question? If not, I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'd make a motion that we approve the amendments, the changes to Policy 1, General Guidelines for the Commission as presented. Second.
I have a motion by Commissioner McNinch and a second by Commissioner Valentine to approve Commission Policy 1 as presented today with the markup and the support material. Is there any question or discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We'll close item 17. And before we open item 18, are we going to have a few minutes for setting up a PowerPoint? It's ready to go. How long are we looking at, Tony?
The total presentation will probably be over an hour.
Okay. With that being said, let's take a little more than a 10-minute break and come back at 9:50 before we open item 18. All right, we're going to go ahead and call the meeting back to order here in Elko, so if everyone could find their seats. I'll turn it over to Director Wasley.
Thank you, Chairman Drew. So this agenda item is the license simplification. This is an item that's been before the Commission, at least in concept, several times, and then in Yerington, we had a little bit more of a specific overview. We had a PowerPoint, and today what I want to do is speak to it broadly, kind of speak to the why. I'll dive down a little bit, and I'll hand it off to the Game Division Administrator, Brian Wakeling. He'll get into some more specifics, and then we'll turn it over to Lauren Chase of Chase & Chase Consulting that's conducted a lot of the analysis and survey. Basically, I guess initially we looked at this effort and looked at the way that we offer licenses, privileges, stamps, and realized that over the course of the last couple decades, we've added stamps, we've added privileges, and we haven't necessarily taken anything away, but through that time, we've added to the complexity of purchasing, the complexity of options. As we look around us and we look at efforts in other states, Oregon, California, Utah, Arizona, there's at least a regional trend in trying to simplify the license buying process. So we thought it would be important to look at our process, look at the privileges, opportunities that we provide, and simply ask the question, can we do better? And as we've gone through this over the course of the last year or so, at certain times during this process, staff has said, well, what if we fail? And I said, again, I said, look, even if we end up exactly where we are, we want to foster the mentality of can we do better? Can we improve the service that we provide to our customers? Is there something different that we can do? So it's really about that process. What we've done is we initially started with some listening groups. Those listening groups, we had small numbers of hunters and anglers that were involved in those listening sessions. They were held strategically at locations around the state. We brought hunters and anglers in. It was not a department function. We created some separation from the department. Chase and Chase Consulting really facilitated, moderated those discussions, got some ideas generated from those hunters and anglers. We developed from that and from some of our own thoughts, we developed a survey. That survey was administered through Chase and Chase, and you'll see here that over 1,600 hunters and anglers were surveyed for their thoughts on some of those concepts and questions. And so we'll go through some of the results of kind of a summary that Lauren will go through today. And again, at the end of the day, if it's the feeling of the sportsmen and women, the anglers, the county advisory boards, the commission, that things aren't broken, the worst case scenario, we've asked the question and tried to foster the mentality of asking that question, can we do better? So at the end of the day, this is about asking, can we do better? So just a couple high-level talking points. We initiated this concept development about 11 months ago, so it's been just shy of a year. The leadership team has engaged in careful planning and discussions. We have both through our leadership team, which meets weekly, and we also have a planning team comprised of many members of leadership, as well as those that have specific responsibilities in the licensing and enforcement arenas. We have weekly meetings to discuss this ongoing effort. Our consultant, Lauren Chase, Chase and Chase, again, calls in and participates in that process. The development has included many informal discussions within the agency and with customers. So certainly we had the formal listening groups, we've had the formal survey, but a lot of these concepts and ideas are informally discussed, not only within the agency, but also with customers. And there's also an ongoing evaluation of existing human dimensions data regarding the support for wildlife-oriented recreation, wildlife conservation, and participation. And so it's important as a state wildlife agency to know what that data looks like, know what the support or lack thereof for wildlife-oriented recreation, wildlife conservation, and participation looks like. Why now? We can improve product delivery, improve product quality even if we aren't doing poorly. And so, again, it's fostering this mindset of not, are we doing enough, but can we do better? We can reduce inadvertent errors by making it easier to comply with regulation. And I think the good example of that is with the definition of spike elk that we just addressed. The whole purpose there was to increase compliance, reduce inadvertent error with that definition. We can eliminate features that may intimidate those that are unfamiliar with our process. And so we talk about recruitment, we talk about bringing people into the outdoor recreation activities, and if it is overly cumbersome, it may be intimidating to those who are unfamiliar with our processes. We can make it easier to participate while ensuring that we have the necessary data to manage wildlife populations. We can eliminate barriers to hunter and angler recruitment, retention, and reactivation. Again, the complexity, the concern of inadvertent error. We look at the number of stamps, trout stamp, duck stamp, upland game stamp. An individual buys a license. There's a whole lot of additional privileges that are currently associated with that before they can participate in certain activities. And we can increase voluntary compliance with existing regulations as a result. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Game Division Administrator Brian Wakeling to dive down a little bit deeper into some more specifics.
Thank you, Mr. Director. You know, the whole thing about why would we even engage in this effort? You know, we made the point earlier, you heard Tony mention, you don't have to get sick to get better. We want to focus, we want to structure that whole focus, and we want to institutionalize that thought process within the agency. We're focusing this, most of our questions have been posed to hunters and anglers. And the reason we're asking hunters and anglers is because this primarily affects them. They're the customers, they're the ones that are going to see that effect. But one of the things we want to repeat as frequently as possible here as well is that we're not trying to, this is not an effort to increase fees. We are trying to make this as close to revenue neutral as we possibly can. Right now, when we look at surveys that we conduct or exit surveys when people are leaving the website, almost without fail, NDOW and the Commission receive pretty high marks already. But we can certainly do things better. When one of the best ways to judge whether or not something we're doing now can be improved upon is handing our set of regulations or having someone who's unfamiliar with a particular aspect, they haven't done it for years, asking them, you know, would you please, you know, try this out. Tell us what you think. And other measures of our satisfaction, one of the best measures of satisfaction is, are we getting return customers and are we getting new customers? And so we are seeing increasing demand for our resources. We see more and more people applying every year in Nevada. But nevertheless, we also nationally, looking at that age criteria and looking at the way hunters and anglers are aging, we see the same thing here in Nevada, the same relationship. Despite the fact that right now we're seeing more demand, the people who are doing it are older, and so we will lose our support at some point. Overall, and these are two statements from my perspective, for conservation to remain relevant, the public must remain engaged in outdoor recreation in some way, shape, or form. They have to care. And it has to remain important to the citizens. If it's not important to them, if this doesn't add value to their life, then conservation will become less relevant, and it'll be harder to do our job. So we're calling this simplification. It's a nomenclature that we find ourselves struggling with. Oftentimes when we look at how do we make things simpler, oftentimes even internally as we're having this discussion, we'll say, well, let's try this idea. And the whole, oftentimes immediately after that, they say, well, that doesn't simplify things. And so what we're really trying to do is deliver product quality and make the delivery of that product better. So in some instances, we may wind up complicating things in some fashion if that is indeed what the customer wants. The customer finds it simpler, that's fine. We're not trying to make it simpler for the department. We want to make it simpler for the customer. We want to remain revenue neutral. We want to increase the value of the product that we're delivering. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Lauren Chase with Chase & Chase. Many of you have had the opportunity to meet with him and just talk to him informally. But he's going to give us a briefing on, and it really is going to be as quick as he can possibly get through something that's he's been involved in this for his lifetime, essentially. And so I'll turn it over to Lauren and have him come up. We'll switch out the presentation over to Min. And
all right. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. I appreciate you having me. I'm excited to be here. I know several of you. Spent many an hour in hospitality suites with you guys. Stolen some M&Ms with you all. So I know some of you. A couple of you guys I don't know. And by way of introduction, I am a social scientist who uses statistics to conserve wildlife. The way I do that is I generate data and give it to decision makers so that they can make more informed decisions. So what I have for you today is a little bit about some information to pass on to you folks as decision makers for your consideration. Again, for those of you guys that don't know me, I started out in the biology realm. I have a bachelor's degree in wildlife biology. I thought I was going to become a conservation officer. Given my skill set, I thought that I could do more for wildlife studying humans rather than studying wildlife. And as you guys know, particularly as commissioners, a lot of your problems are not biological in nature. A lot of your problems are social in nature, political in nature. So I hope today that I can relay some of that information to you folks and help you have more information regarding your decisions. So everybody can read this whole entire slide, right? Let's zoom in on this. I want to give you a little bit of background, a little bit about what's going on in your state. You guys have a feel for what's going on in your state. But I do want to give you some numbers behind those. So Nevada is growing. And I put Clark County there because that's essentially what's growing. What you have on your bottom axis is time and then numbers in millions. You can see that, yes, Nevada is growing, but a large part of that growth is due to Clark County. Nevada is changing. In 2 decades, you have gone from about 80% Caucasian to a little over 50% Caucasian. That is a big, swift change in demography of your state. A large part of that growth comes from Latino communities, the Hispanic communities. That trend line is expected to grow out. You'll notice that the data is 6 years old, but you can extrapolate out to see what's happening to your state. Very few people in Nevada fish. I tried to make those Venn diagram proportional to the state. So the size of those circles represent proportionally, visually, how many people fish and how many people hunt in Nevada. Not a lot. They're not distributed very well either. This down here represents the greatest part of your hunters and anglers. They're not distributed evenly. Hunting and fishing is on the decline. On a per capita basis, you guys have gone from, I don't know, about 14%. Now you're down to about 5% for fishing. You used to be about 5% for hunting, and now you're just above 2%. And then finally, for the background, license structure is outdated. This is a comparison of your neighbor states and comparable states and the dates that they switched and adjusted their license structure versus the time that you adjusted. Okay? So you got 12 years here in Nevada. You've got, on average, maybe a year or two in other states. That's the background that I come to you and approach this problem with. And my objective, as NDOW engaged me, is to simplify that license structure. The complexity of regulations is one of the major barriers to participation, and it's one of the major barriers to recruitment to participation. And so if state agencies can make it easier to go hunting and fishing, you're going to get more clientele. So, like Brian said, we took a three-pronged approach here. We did a comparative analysis, and this is a normative assessment. And what we did is we went in and compared your current prices to the prices of those states that surround you. Anytime you see a map like this, I'm depicting visually where you all stand in terms of that particular license. This is one example. The annual adult fishing, currently it's $29. Your neighbor states, it's more expensive, excuse me, with the exception of Idaho and Colorado. When I show you things like this, I'm not expecting you to read and understand the numbers. What I am hoping for is you see visually the colors, and you'll be able to say, okay, yep, Colorado's more expensive, Oregon's more expensive. If you want, that information is available, and you can contact me at a later date, and you can go through this on your own pace and actually look at those numbers. The second approach that we did was a qualitative assessment. We went to these areas, and we selected people within a 20-minute radius or 20-minute drive time to come into these focus groups. These focus groups are meant to get ideas and understand the breadth of the spectrum that's out there. And it's the ideas, not the people, that are representative. Because when you talk to these focus groups, it's very difficult to understand, okay, how representative is that? Because the people that come to focus groups generally tend to be a little bit more avid than the average hunter or angler. So anytime that you see this style of pull quote, what I'm doing is I'm sharing with you data that has come from the qualitative analysis, and that's a cue in to see the themes that have emerged here. In fact, this is one example of the theme where many people have said, you know what, just charge me what it costs and let me get out there. I'm paraphrasing, but this statement right here is very representative of many people who have made that statement. Now, the third and final prong that we took on this is a quantitative assessment. We engaged in telephone interviews using that as our main mode, and we got over 1,600 responses. Now, to give you an idea, you probably have seen political polls at the national and even at the local level. You'll see that so-and-so is ahead of so-and-so by X amount. And you always see in small print, plus or minus 3%. Okay? This sample size is 500 people more than those national level studies. Okay? So even though it's a small percent because they were chosen at random, they represent that population. And we took very specific steps to ensure that that 1,600 represents the population. One of which we do what's called a quartile analysis. People who respond late to the survey are more like non-respondents than those who respond early. And so you do a quantitative analysis in that way. We also did a comparison of the sample to the population. For example, in the population, 18% are females. In the response, 15% are females. Again, anytime you see a graph like this, you'll know that this is quantitative. It's a visual cue for quantitative. That's one comparison we made. The other comparison that we made is the average age. The average age of the hunting population is 44 and some change. The sample is also 44 and some change. So we took a lot of steps to ensure that this this sample represents your population. Again, map, that's state comparison. Pull quote is qualitative themes, and the graphs are quantitative. So the very first question is, should NDOW simplify? I have a couple things for you here. The first thing I want to do is talk about compliance. And this is an excellent example where mixed mode methods are very beneficial. When I say mixed modes, I mean qualitative on your left and quantitative on your right, where we find, you know, there's a guy 20 years old, in his 20s. Very avid, lifelong hunter. He's figured out the draw, but when he hears all the nuance associated with fishing, his response is, I don't know if I can handle that. Which was very insightful. That's a theme that emerged within the qualitative analysis. Now, I'm going to be showing you several graphs like this. On this side, where there's a 1, that is strongly disagree, neutral, agree, and strongly agree. That's going to be the case anytime you see a graph that appears like this. And we ask the question, do you have any value for an all-in-one license just to make sure that you are in order when you have a law enforcement contact? And very large showing saying, yes, I would appreciate an all-in-one just to make sure that I didn't miss X stamp. Now, this is a nice comparison between that qualitative and quantitative analysis, where you're using both of them to triangulate. It's very much like trying to find an animal using radio telemetry. Okay? You don't just take one fix and start hiking. Okay? You take a couple fixes, get an idea where that animal is, and go. Okay? As social scientists, we do the same thing. We get a couple reads, quantitative, qualitative, and then go. Value. Up here, same story. Disagree, agree. If they had an all-in-one license, would you hunt or fish species that you have never done so before? A lot of people said, yeah, I might do that. Which is great, because what that does is it makes your hunters and anglers more resilient. And that way, when their favorite lake goes away, or there's a fire in their favorite area, they have other places to go. Okay? Speaking of other areas, they might try other areas for this all-in-one license. And then this quote, I love this quote, and it's very representative of a lot of things. Your hunting license is like a truck with no tires. You're giggling because it's true. Okay? And I thought, you know what? That quote represents a lot of the findings that we have. People perceive your hunting license as a gateway to the draw because it's not good for much anything else. The frequency of changing. Okay? We ask people, in regards to price adjustments, would you rather have small changes more frequently, or would you rather have larger changes less frequently? And here you can see the breakdown of combo hunting and fishing licenses. Overwhelmingly, people want those small changes more frequently. That might be of use as you approach your legislature. And then here's some qualitative analysis that backs up that data, gives a little bit more insight into that. Revenue. Revenue was a conversation that we had within those. This one, well stated by a man in his 30s. If it tags 50 and not 30, I'm still going to buy it. All I want to know is that $50 going to make conservation and his experience the same as it was 20 years ago to today to 20 years from now? That comment was met with such agreement. I thought the guy was going to get a standing ovation in a focus group. People really resonated with that. So the other is, I'd like to have a buffet style. I'm okay with NDOW making a little extra money off of it. Again, transparency, knowing where that money goes. And then the other, and I guess main conversation that we had is, should we aggregate? Should we go buffet style where it's one cost to get in, you get everything? Or is it a la carte where you pay for things as you go? There was a little disputation here amongst people. Some people really liked the buffet style. Some people really liked the a la carte. I know what I want. I'm going to buy what I want. Now, the focus groups, it was very apparent to me that people love NDOW. They love what the products and services that NDOW provides, and they're okay with sharing that. They are okay with saying, you know what, I respect the hell out of those guys. So should this simplify? Yes, absolutely simplify, but certainly not at the cost of services provided. Because as we collected this data, it was very apparent that people loved the services that were over there. So in order to do that, you got to maintain that revenue neutrality. Here's the yes, but. We asked people, excuse me, how important activities were to them, how avid they were. You folks have some avid folks in here. You've got a lot of passion in Nevada. And even though 2% hunt, there's a lot of passion there. So, on a scale to 10, how avid of an angler, or I'm sorry, how avid of a hunter are you? Okay, this right here represents the hunters within the population, or I'm sorry, the anglers within the population that are possibly avid anglers, but not necessarily avid hunters. Again, here, these are your anglers. So there's a lot of passion out there. In fact, one of the questions that I had within the focus groups, and I got to take a quick second to give kudos to NDOW and their core team. I put these guys through the ringer. I made them go through it. I asked them why, and then I said, why is that important? Okay, great. Why is that important? I drilled down and I made them think about it, and it was obnoxious. I'm the first one to say, but I think they did a great job, and they have a great focus group product because of it, and they were willing to put in that time. So one of the questions that we had is, sell hunting and fishing to us, and that way we can get some ideas of what makes the passion, what's behind the passion, what's the motivation behind that passion. One person said something that resonated with me personally. You can't put that in words. It's an experience that you take home, and you can't express it. I identify with that. I'm a sportsman. I grew up in Montana. I picked up a nasty habit where I hunt elk and pronghorn and deer, and I love it. And these are my two boys. This is what we do. This is my typical weekend. And so as I give these recommendations for consideration, I want you to understand where they're coming from. They're not only coming from social scientists, they're also coming from sportsmen. And so we need to balance the services against the impact to sportsmen and women. All right, let's get down to it. Let's get down to the data. I have some general recommendations for you, for your consideration. I have some specific recommendations for your consideration. Online purchases. Again, this is strongly disagree. This is strongly agree. People find your application, your electronic application, very easy. You'll note also when you're talking about applications for tags, some of that approval right here versus right here, and you'll see that this is 30% for strongly agree and about 20% for strongly agree here. Some of that moves down. Most of it from the qualitative analysis we found came from the difficulty that is associated with putting in multiple people at the same time. That was the issue that they had, and if that can be rectified, I would almost guarantee you that that would start to trend more to the agree side of things. So NDOW should consider switching entirely to an online sales to recoup the dealer apportionment. If you can do that, you automatically get a bump in revenue that doesn't even come from hunters and anglers. Upsell to a combo. It's easier to convert a hunter to a fisher than vice versa. Here's why I'm saying that. We asked if a combination were a nominal fee higher, in this case we said $5, would you consider buying a combination license? And we asked that of people who had a fishing license versus those who had a hunting license. So your anglers, not as excited to spend a little bit more money to get that combo. It's not really the money, it's more of a lifestyle. Whereas your hunters, gosh, if that was only $5 more, yeah, I'd go for it. So something to consider, that NDOW should consider pricing the fishing license independently, and then strategically pricing the hunting and combination license such that you're gaining the max amount of revenue that comes from federal match through Pittman-Robertson funds, as well as Dingell-Johnson funds. The cost of a license. Cost certainly affects behavior, but it prevents participation only in a very small percentage. And here's why I say that. We asked, has the cost of hunting and fishing ever been an issue for you personally? A little less than a third, maybe a fourth of the people said yes. In the past it has. Now, note that it says ever been. Has it ever been an issue for your family? Again, a little more than a quarter said, yeah, it's been an issue for my family at some point. So those are not time bound. It's just in your lifetime. So we put a time boundary upon it. And we asked, in the last 3 years, have you ever skipped a year of fishing because of the cost? About 12% said yes, I've skipped it because of the cost. 12%, that's 1 in 8. How about hunting? Have you ever skipped hunting? Again, approximately 1 in 8 have said, yep, I've skipped a year of hunting. Now, in the past 3 years, has the cost of licenses and fees affected the number of species that you applied for? About a third, 1 in 3 said, yes, I didn't apply for all the species that I wished I could have because of the cost. So, NDOW should consider distributing opportunity. For example, allocating 1 big game tag a year to a hunter. For example, Brian, I'll use him as an example. He was able to draw a couple big game tags this year. What that would do is spread out opportunity so that he has a hunting opportunity this year, but not 3 opportunities this year. Hunting is more central to a person's lifestyle. So changes and adjustments to hunting and combination license fees are going to be more resilient to those price adjustments. All right, 3-year licenses. A couple people were asking me about this last night. We wanted to know, is there a viability there? Can we go to a 3-year or a multi-year license? In this case, we used 3 years as an example. And we asked, I'm going to zoom in because this is a little bit complicated. Right now, on your left, you're seeing the disagree versus agree. And we split these samples up into 3 treatments. People were assigned to these treatments randomly, and we asked, if NDOW offered a 3-year license, would you be interested in purchasing it? That's this one. And then we said, would you be interested in purchasing it for 5% off and 10% off? Now, these folks were randomly assigned, and no person heard multiple versions of this. They were just asked 10%, 5%, or no percent off. And here's what we found. For combination licenses, more or less even across the board, we have 24% who would say, yeah, I'd do it at no cost. A little bit counterintuitive, at 10% off, you get less support for that. Let's focus in on hunting. Again, no percent off, 5% off, 10% off. There is not a strong trend there saying that by doing a discount, you're going to be selling more in volume. How about fishing? Fishing was a little bit higher than the others. We have, an average of 47 there. 47% might be willing to do it. Again, no percent off, 5% off, 10% off. So what we can conclude by this, by randomly assigning these to different groups, what we can conclude is a multi-year fishing license might be viable. But the complications from that multi-year license is not likely offset by the revenue brought in and the convenience to the potential customer that would want that. And so one consideration for NDOW is probably not doing a multi-year license. It's probably not viable at this time. A better option is to have an auto-renew, and that way you get the best of both worlds. You don't have to administrate multi-year licenses, but you eliminate the churn that people are worried about. People within agencies are worried about churn. And you give your customer that convenience that they want from the multi-year, because that's essentially what they're buying. All right, 365 versus annual. When I see data like this where there's almost 80% on the agree, to me that is a mandate. Your constituency wants 365. Now, even before we asked about 365, we asked a different question, and we said, should NDOW sell a license that's only good for January and February to kind of tide people over? A lot of people like that option. Then, when they heard this option, they went gangbusters for it. So NDOW should strongly consider switching to that 365 license, just to show that you're listening to your constituency. Obviously, you're going to benchmark other states that have gone to 365. I know the complication that is associated with switching to 365. It's not snap your fingers and licensing staff does their magic. There's going to be some headache. There's going to be some disputation. But what Brian said early on is we need to make this simple for the customer, not necessarily for the department. So I feel that would be an investment well spent. Before I move on, within the focus groups, there was some concern that people would game the system. If NDOW chooses to go this direction, a simple statement of what you're going to do to prevent gaming the system would go a long way with your customers. All right, youth license. I thought this was particularly appropriate from the qualitative, talking about your pre-adult license. Treating 16 and 17-year-old kids as if they're pre-adults is stupid. I'd rather see them out hunting, fishing, rather than up drinking in the hills or playing video games in my basement. So, redefine the term youth. Now, asking about should NDOW lower the age to age 10? There's not a real strong mandate here. There are more people who disagree with that statement than agree with it. You can see the breakout of kids versus no kids there. So not a real strong mandate there. Should youth have a reduced cost until they're 18? Again, this is a split decision right here. More people are on the, yeah, let's go ahead and do that side. But again, splitting out the kids, no kids, obviously the people who have kids are more in favor of extending it out to 18. However, when asked, should the youth license be less than an adult's license, nearly everybody said yes, particularly those with no kids. I'd be curious to know who this guy is or who this gentleman is who said, nah, we'll pay it all. So that's an interesting take. However, there's a strong mandate to, yes, keep those licenses at a minimal cost. And so if you're going to keep them at a minimal cost, the question is, where do you place it? We did an analysis, and this is very analogous to market research, where we did what's called indifference points. And this is used all the time in market research, where we asked and put people in different categories. How much would you be willing to pay? Split them up into different groups. And here's what we came out with. A lot of people, in fact, 2/3 are willing to pay $20 or more. If you were to price it at $15, you'd get a larger chunk right there. If you placed it at $5, you'd get nearly everybody. That's the youth. Let's go to the other bookend, where defining youth as 10 to 18 at time of purchase, the age adjustments don't have a lot of support. There's a lot of mixed things there. And so as you go forward with this bill, the age adjustments might be one of the first things that you jettison. Those are not as important. You know, if the bill is going to fail because of that one particular thing, there's not a strong mandate there. So that might be one thing that goes. And so this is one scenario where a price decrease may result in increased revenue. What I mean by that is you're charging less per license, but your volume goes up to offset that. And this is a good scenario where I believe that to be the case. All right, seniors. There's very little tolerance to changing the senior license by anyone. Here's why I say that. We asked, should NDOW eliminate that 5-year residency? No mandate. In fact, this is almost split 50-50 as far as agree and disagree. When we asked them about, should we raise the age to 70? People said no. Not only did they say no, they said hell no. Okay? So that is not strongly supported at all. Same thing, increasing the residency requirement from 5 years to 10 years. They said no, not as strongly, but still said no. So there's not a large mandate to eliminate that 5-year requirement. So if that's not on the radar, that's probably not something that I would look forward to. I would not try to integrate that into the bill. NDOW should strongly weigh the political capital of more stringent requirements on the senior license when you compare it to, or compare it against, the revenue that might be generated from this group. And NDOW should consider making the senior license somewhere between $10 and $20. I'll come back to that later. So those are my general recommendations. Here's my specific recommendations. And here, I'm going to slow down, and Mr. Chair, if it's all right with you, maybe get a little bit more casual with Robert's rules. And if people don't understand, please let me know, and we'll back up and move forward. Is that all right with you, Mr. Chair? Thank you. So let's get to it. Let's get to fishing. There is a very high demand for consolidating the fishing license. Let me show you why. We asked and gave 2 options. Do you want a lot of stamps and just pay for the stamps that you want? Or do you want an all-in-one license? You just pay the money and go. I'm labeling those buffet and a la carte. Overwhelmingly, regardless of what type of what type of license you purchased, there's an overwhelming mandate to switch to a buffet, a one price fits all. Now, here's where we're going to have to slow down a little bit. This is a graph, and down at the bottom, people were split into 4 treatments. This is why instead of only going with 1,100 for sample size, we went to 1,600. And that way we can slice out these people into smaller groups and still maintain a good margin of error. So we split out these groups, and each person received one treatment. And the treatment was, the license is currently $29. If the license were this price, this price, this price, or this price, would you continue purchasing a fishing license? Each person was assigned randomly to these treatments. And so you'll note that one of these, right here, the $30, is very, very close to the current price of $29. That's purposeful. And the intent behind that is to measure what's called strategic bias. When you see that it's $29 and 9% say no, that's a deal breaker for me. $1 is not a fiscal reason to stop for most people. In fact, for nearly all people. And so what you can do by that is, because these were assigned by in random, you can estimate the strategic bias of saying, I'm not going to pay a dime more. Because we know that $1 more, people are going to continue to buy that license. Particularly when it's presented as it was presented, of all stamps, all privileges included. So $1 more, not a deal breaker. And so what you can do is you can adjust this line up. And it adjusts up about 9%. And so the current price is $29. The average angler spends about $36. Now what I mean by that is the average angler spends their $29 on the license and then spends an additional $7 on licenses, or I'm sorry, on stamps. So that's what your average angler spends. Now, CPI price, that is the price adjusted for inflation. $29 back in 2004 equates to about $36.50 today. So if you were just moving to get back to revenue neutral, you would adjust for that inflation and price it about there. However, you're including a lot more stamps, a lot more privileges within that. So for the fishing license, it's very difficult to just say, we're going to adjust for inflation and we're going to move on. You have to adjust for the change in privileges as well. Now, you'll notice up in the corner, the fishing license, your state's pretty light, which means that when you compare to your neighboring states, you're pretty cheap. So, when I make recommendations for NDOW to consider, what I'm doing is I'm taking into account how you compare to your other states. I'm taking into account what your people want. I'm taking into account about where your break-even point is. And as I make my recommendation, I would ask NDOW to consider pricing near $37. And if you're looking to sell it, highlight the elimination of that trout stamp. People hate the trout stamp because you can be fishing for another species and there just happens to be trout within that. People buy the trout stamp just to be covered. Okay? That's recommendation number 1 for fishing. Let's move on to hunting. There's a mandate to switch to buffet. It's not nearly as strong. In fishing, this was up near 80%. Now you're over 50%, which still pretty good strong indication that people want simplification, one size fits all, or one price fits all. Now, same graph as fishing. I want to point out a couple different things. The current price is $33. Now, when you ask people, would you pay $35? You'll see a drop of approximately 22%. 22% say, you know what, $2? That's a deal breaker. Now, I don't know what your experience is with hunting, but the expense associated with hunting for me, the licenses and fees are pretty nominal compared to gas and all of the things that go into it. In fact, this year's going to be a bad year. I've got to buy a new gun for my boy, and it's going to be spendy this year. So when I hear people who say $2 breaks the bank, I'm not going to go anymore, that's strategic bias. That's people who are saying, no, I'm not going to allow you to use this information to bump the prices. That's essentially what that is saying. So as you make that adjustment, your average angler spends approximately $36, meaning that they buy the $33 license and then they spend $3 in stamps. CPI price, the price adjusted for inflation, is approximately $42. That does not include the stamps and privileges associated with it. That's just exchanging $33 to today's money. So again, taking all those things into account, my recommendation is consider pricing near $45 and highlight the opportunity to hunt small game. Combination license. This one, same approach. My recommendation is to consider pricing near $72 and emphasize the all-inclusive nature of this. This ought to be supported very much by your avid folks. Your avid folks are purchasing that combination license and many, many stamps associated with it. They're spending somewhere between $110 and $130. You're giving them the same privileges for $72. That's a screaming deal and a bargain for those folks. Deer. Deer, in order to stay revenue neutral, you have $30 to hunt deer back in 2004. This is a CPI multiplier, and this comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's the multiplier that you use to transfer money from 2004 to money in today's money in May 2016. That's the latest data that they have. So $30 becomes $38.15. In order to stay revenue neutral, I would make the recommendation to consider pricing near $40 to maintain that revenue neutrality. And people might be like, hold on a second, you're telling me it's $38.15 and now you're giving me a recommendation of $40. The reason why I would do that, and I would ask you to consider that, is because in 3 years, that's approximately what it's going to be. Elk, same thing, taking 120, doing the CPI multiplier, comes out to 152. My recommendation is to consider pricing near 160, again, allowing for growth into that, because in 3 years, that's going to be what revenue neutral will be. Endow's been operating at a loss because last time they adjusted fees was in 2004. So as the spending power of the dollar has gone down, there's been operating a loss. And this might be an opportunity. Yes, you might be making a couple bucks in the first 2 years, but you're back to revenue neutrality in several years. All right, the app fee. Current price, $15. We asked 50 cents more. 9% said, you know what, that 50 cents is going to break the bank for me. I'm not going to participate. That's your strategic bias. You can then move that line up, and your CPI price is about $19. Regards to application fees, we asked, would you rather see the fees separated out and know where it goes? Or would you rather just see one aggregated fee? Here, there's no real strong mandate. There's a little bit stronger for separated fees. So what I might recommend is in order to simplify, all we need to do is aggregate it and appease these folks. But right after the purchase, immediately after the purchase, say, you spent X amount of dollars, here's how it's allocated, here's a pie chart to where it goes. And that way everybody's happy. That might be one recommendation that NDOW could take. So this is an Elko woman saying, I have no problem paying the fees, and NDOW making a little bit of money off of it. It's just nice to see where the money's going. Transparency is key. So, what I would ask NDOW to do is to consider pricing $20 for all big game. Now you're going to have to make some adjustments to keep that elk level, but simplification. Demonstrate the connection between administrative costs to on the ground. In the focus groups, field presence was what people seem to value. That's what they evaluate the department on. So to finalize, I have 4 groups of considerations for you. The first has to do with governance. Switching to a 365 will show your constituency that you're listening to them. This idea of refund if not drawn, that creates a lot of confusion for folks. In fact, in the focus groups, we found that many people put in for that not knowing that their bonus points would not be accruing. Now, that causes a lot of confusion. It also says to your constituency, if you don't draw for big game, it's not even worth having a hunting license. Now, under the current regime, yeah, that's true. Your hunting license is somewhat worthless. However, as you begin to aggregate this and all the stamps that are included with it, I would recommend eliminating that option. One, to eliminate the confusion, but also to send the message that, hey, there's some small game out there, and it's awesome. And it's a substitute. It's also a good recruitment opportunity. When youth go hunting, let's say they're lucky, and between the years of 12 and 18, they're able to go 4 times. 4 times does not a tradition make. Think about small game, though. You can go hunting small game 4 times a month if you'd like. That's a tradition. That's where the hunting is truly implied there. So something to consider. And initiating a small game campaign. You've got a bunch of people who have a lot of new privileges. They might not know what to do with it because they're one of those people who get a refund. It's not worth it. So one other thing is to demonstrate a parallel effort to achieve efficiencies. What I mean by that is, as you're looking to simplify this and maintain revenue neutrality, you're going to have to adjust the fees. But if you show on the same side, on the flip side of the coin, of here's what we're doing to tighten our belt, in fact, here's what we have done to tighten our belt, that will be very well received and get some transparency, which is the next step of be as transparent as possible. We already talked about immediately after the purchase. Now, for the sake of time, I'm going to quickly run through these and paraphrase this. Folks get a little extra money at Christmas time. And they want to go hunting and fishing because they have a little bit of extra money to purchase those licenses. But why would you purchase a license on December 28th when it's going to expire in 2 months? And so they wait, thinking, I'll buy it in March. But March comes around and they end up not buying it. So you're losing a little bit of money there. The 365 ought to rectify that. Okay? Again, I have no problem spending a little bit of money. All I want to know is, does the wildlife benefit? Recruitment. This is something that's important to me. Simplify and then advertise the heck out of that mentor program. Once people found out about the mentor program, they were excited about it. They were ready to go. They had no idea that it existed, though. something to consider. Another parallel effort to reduce the regulatory burden, if you want to have a frustrating experience, talk to a non-angler about a slot limit. If slot limits are not biologically necessary and just traditions, get rid of them. Make things easier on people. We have gone to waterfowl where you're trying to maximize opportunity, where you can have 3 pintail and a couple mallards, and if they're hens, you can have this many mallards, and if they're drakes, you can have so many mallards. I wouldn't worry so much about creating opportunity for the very avid people. You have them. I would create opportunity for people coming in. Splash counts are a simple example of that. 3 ducks, whatever they are, or whatever that number might be. Because newbies can't identify waterfowl on the wing. I have experience, and sometimes I mess up. And then eliminate those pre-adult licenses. Like I said, this is important to me. This is a week ago today. I'm a cub master of Pack 37. This question right here that I'm asking is, how many have never fished before? This is awesome, folks. There was only 5. Out of 26 kids, there were only 5 that had never been fishing before. That is phenomenal. And this lake, it's, I don't know, maybe a mile from my house, and they've never fished that before. So, glass is half full, folks. How to do this, the strategy of how to do this. Obtain a legislative champion. Bring in your sportsmen's groups, which I feel ought to be an easy sell. For sportsmen's groups, they tend to be more avid, and those who are more avid, this becomes a better bargain, the more avid that you are. Also bringing in stakeholders, and when I say stakeholders, I mean stakeholders who might not necessarily be contributing directly to conservation, the Sierra Clubs, the CBDs of the world, where you can say, you know what, simplification, it's going to result in more federal match, and that federal match can be used in conservation and non-game species. It's a win for everybody. And then finally, miscellaneous. Eliminate that online fee. People hate online fees. I told you I'd come back to the pricing of the senior. What I would recommend is the senior, Native American license, the military, and the disabled vet all become combined into one special license and sold for a nominal fee. Enough to get your federal match out of that. Second to last point, strive to increase revenue, not prices. I see time and time again as I work with states that states want to stick it to the non-residents, because if you have non-residents paying more, that means that residents are not paying as much. That philosophy is folly. If you charge more, your volume might go down, which means your revenue is going down. Try to not stick it to the residents. Try to keep things as revenue neutral as possible for your residents. And if that means adjusting non-resident prices to get more people into the draw, so be it. Finally, replicating the in-store experience. It was very important to these folks to have that in-store experience, because people loved taking their old license, plopping it down on the counter, and having it replicated, and they walk out. They don't have to think about it. If you can replicate that experience online, where their information is already pre-filled, all they have to do is click buy or auto buy, which is better. You create that online experience, or that in-store experience online. The other thing is, people love those Tesla or the plastic licenses. If you were to mail those to their physical addresses for $5, I can guarantee you'd have a lot of takers on it, because people absolutely love that. So folks, what I have done is I have gone over a state comparison. I've gone over qualitative analysis. I've gone over quantitative analysis in ways to simplify your license structure in an effort to not only keep NDOW financially solvent, but also to simplify for your hunters and anglers and keep things revenue neutral. So, Mr. Chair, that concludes my presentation. I would yield the floor to you and make myself available if there's any questions.
Okay. Brian, did you have any more comments, or Tony, or any more PowerPoint?
Just a couple more slides.
Okay, let's do the slides, and I think we'll take a short break and get everyone back up.
You want this? There you go.
Okay. So coming back to this, our goal is to increase the customer satisfaction. They provided us, Chase and Chase have now provided us with the 3 different types of analyses that Lauren talked about. From here, what we plan to do is we continue to have the in-depth conversations about how we go forward from here. We want to focus on what the customer wants, not what we currently do. So if we've got something that we can change that's going to provide more value, we want to pursue it. And we want to kind of take off oftentimes we always think, well, we can't do that. Well, a lot of other states have. We can do it. We need to look at what our customers want, not this is the way we do it. And that comes back to the culture that Director Wasley was speaking about early on. We want to consider how we can do things, how we can continually challenge the process to do better. The phrase we've been using is revenue neutrality, and I think in a lot of cases you may be getting some different perspectives of, do we mean where we are now or where we would be if we had the CPI? And I think, and I'm sure Director Wasley will present this as well, but what we're talking about is we're not looking to generate more revenue. We're able to do things right now. We're not looking to get to the CPI, but that might be something that influences one fee so that we maintain revenue neutrality overall. We intend to finalize our recommendations and considerations based on the input we're receiving. And then we want to go back out and have some community meetings with the public once again. And currently we are planning to be in Ely on July 14th, Elko July 15th, Reno on the 18th, Fallon on the 20th, and Las Vegas on the 28th. Then we'll be developing bill draft resolution language. It's already there, draft for consideration. And we also will be continuing to provide updates to the cabs and to the commission as we go forward with this. I want to let Tony back up here and have him wrap up. And
Thanks, Brian. Just a couple points of clarification. The point that Brian made about the CPI and the revenue neutral, certainly it's important to know that, but when we say revenue neutral, we're not thinking about the CPI and where we would be with inflation. And so certainly the argument can be made that to truly be revenue neutral, those adjustments would have to occur. That hasn't been our intent to actually pass any kind of a fee increase. I'd also like to point out and thank Lauren for his presentation and this work, but this is something that our core team and Lauren has just completed the summary of, and we've just been exposed to it in the last week to week and a half and have these discussions. And so Lauren, as our contractor, isn't bringing these ideas before you today as the department's recommendations, but he's bringing it to you from his perspective, almost simultaneous with our awareness of it, as ideas and concepts to consider. And with these ideas and concepts to consider, my hope is that people don't leave this room today and tell everybody that the Nevada Department of Wildlife is going to go to a 365-day license for this or raise deer tags to that. These are what Lauren's research and Lauren's background have demonstrated that are potential issues to consider. So as Brian indicated, these considerations will be finalized and then taken out as the the third step, the third public engagement opportunity, certainly for the county advisory boards and others to weigh in on those recommendations. And it was our desire to have this presentation here to remain as transparent as possible through this process and not be developing what we might call final considerations absent the commission, CABs, or interested public's knowledge. So with that, I'd like to thank Lauren again for bringing it, for coming here today and presenting this and summarizing all this. And there's an open dialogue with each and all of you. Certainly, if it's something that the county advisory boards would like to discuss further at the county advisory board workshop, that's something we can include there as well. Just logistics, the next agenda item also is a PowerPoint, and would prefer to have you guys in these seats for that as well. It's the blue ribbon panel resolution. Any questions?
I think what we'll do is take a short break, because that was like getting blasted in the face with a fire hose. It's great information. I just need a little time to process it, and I'm sure others do. So we'll take a break until 11:15.